I'm going to call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. I want to welcome our members and our witnesses for today's hearing on cybersecurity threats to communications networks and private sector responses. Back in October, the House Republican Cybersecurity Task Force recommended that the committees of jurisdiction review cybersecurity issues. So this hearing continues our committee's review of cybersecurity issues with an examination of threats to communications networks and the responses of the private sector. Threats to communications networks have come a long way in a very short time, and they are very, very real and serious. Now, before coming to Congress, I spent about 22 years as a radio broadcaster, and as a small businessman, I had to worry about securing our communications network. Back then, it was 20 years ago, relatively straightforward. You had to have a fence around the tower, and you couldn't let people get near the transmitter, and a few things like that. And somebody there, and every once in a while, somebody would come and shoot an insulator out or something, and you kind of got grumpy and had to repair that. And every once in a while, some idiot would try to cut the guy wires, and those usually sprung around and got them. That never happened in my stations, but it does happen occasionally. But all of that was sort of security of that wireless age. Not anymore. While physical security remains important, cybersecurity has also become a pressing concern. Now a small business confronts a dizzying array of threats online, from things like the Zeus Trojan horse to Stuxnet. From lulsec to botnets, these threats are serious. Unless our cyber defenses hold, a bad actor could drain the bank account of a business, crash an online company's website, or launch a barrage of cyber attacks on a company's network. Those are serious consequences for any business, and especially for the small businesses that are the heart of creating jobs in this economy. And indeed, in our small business, 10 years or so ago, when we did create a computer network and put everything up on digital audio, our main server was hacked and taken over, and all of a sudden it started running slower and slower and slower, and eventually we determined it had been overtaken. Every month we learn more about these cyber threats, and what we have learned thus far is of great concern. I'm concerned that our communications networks are under siege. I am worried that the devices consumers use to access those networks are vulnerable. And I'm concerned that our process for looking at communication supply chain issues lacks coordination. I'm also concerned that our cyber defenses are not keeping pace with our cyber threats. Now, in this hearing, we're lucky to have the voices of 5 private sector witnesses to guide us through the complex issues of cybersecurity. I'm hoping that you'll tell me that cyberspace is secure and we can all rest easy at night. Unfortunately, I've read your testimony, and it's not so. So I expect you'll tell us the threats of our communications networks are all too real. American businesses are losing dollars, jobs, intellectual property, and much, much more because of cybercrime and cyber espionage, and that our national security is, frankly, is potentially at risk as well. I also expect you'll explain what the private sector is doing to fortify our cybersecurity defenses. The private sector owns most of the critical infrastructure, the wires, the servers, the towers, the base stations that make up our communications networks. And they are on the front lines of cybersecurity. So I want to know what cybersecurity services are being offered to consumers, what protections are being deployed in our communications networks, what affirmative steps the private sector has taken to lock down the supply chain and to combat cybercrime. I also expect to hear what you think the appropriate, and I underscore appropriate, federal role is. Are federal laws and regulations helping or interfering with information sharing? Are federal regulations of cybersecurity practices appropriate, and if so, how? Should the federal government be providing incentives for Internet service providers and other members of the private sector to invest and innovate in the cybersecurity arena? And how should our country's fiscal state shape our discussion of the federal role? These questions and others will form the basis for deciding what cybersecurity legislation, if any, is needed in the near term and how we can best secure cyberspace in the long run. So I want to thank our panelists today for taking time out of your schedules to be here to help inform this important subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee on what we should do and how we can be better informed in doing our job. With that, I would recognize the gentlelady from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Eshoo, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this morning's important hearing, and I want to welcome the witnesses, and I'm especially pleased that Juniper Networks and McAfee, from two outstanding Silicon Valley companies, are here to talk to us about tackling the challenges of cybersecurity this morning. We all recognize the serious threat to our nation's communications networks. Since 2006, the number of federal cybersecurity incidents reported to the Department of Homeland Security has increased by 659%. That's a whopping number. And the economic impact of these incidences is equally significant. A recent study by the Poneman Institute estimated that the median annualized cost of cybercrime to a victim organization is $5.9 million per year, an increase of 56% from 2010. The more we rely on the Internet to conduct our business, the more vulnerabilities we create for hackers to exploit. Having served as a member of the House Intelligence Committee for 8 years, I'm very well aware of the threat, not just from criminal hackers, but also obviously from other countries. But talking about the problem is not enough. We need to act, and that requires the help of both the private sector and the federal government. The private sector really represents 95% of this, the federal government the other 5%. One of the first steps to tackling this growing threat is, I think, education and training. Whether at home or in the workplace, every American should understand what they can do to protect themselves against a cyber attack. Improved information sharing is also a key aspect of our nation's response to cybersecurity. If we're going to ask industry to report cybersecurity incidents to the government, then we need to establish a clear process to do so. I'm pleased to support our colleague Mike Rogers' effort, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act of 2011. That is one of 3 or 4 bills in the House. There are at least 3 or 4 in the Senate as well. It's also important to recognize that timely alerts to consumers and businesses can be the difference between an isolated cybersecurity incident and one that impacts millions of users. A voluntary ISP code of conduct currently being developed by the FCC is one of the proposed ways to alert consumers when a botnet or other malware infection is discovered. Today's hearing is a very important opportunity for us to better understand our subcommittee's role in cybersecurity, including what role the FCC and NTIA should play in protecting our nation's communication networks, and how the private sector and other federal agencies should interact with them. So thank you to all of the witnesses, those that come from Silicon Valley to instruct us. And what remaining time I have, I'd like to yield to Mr. Markey.
I thank the gentlelady. Last week, FBI Director Robert Mueller testified that cyber threats will soon surpass terrorism as the #1 threat facing the United States. We know from the Department of Homeland Security that there have already been threats to the utility sector. We also know that Russia and China have probed our electricity grid to find vulnerabilities. Our economy hinges on a reliable flow of power, with losses that go into the billions of dollars with every major blackout. Our national security also depends upon it, since 99% of the electricity used to power our military facilities, including critical strategic command assets, comes from the commercially operated grid. Last September, I asked all 5 commissioners from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission under our jurisdiction to name the #1 threat to electricity reliability. All 5 commissioners agreed cyber threats are the #1 threat to the grid. In 2009, the full Energy and Commerce Committee unanimously passed the GRID Act, which I authored along with Chairman Upton. That bill gave FERC the authority to quickly issue grid security orders or rules if vulnerabilities or threats have not been adequately addressed by the industry. It was killed in the Senate. All 5 FERC commissioners also agreed that giving FERC this authority would increase America's ability to secure our electric grid. With cyber threats growing by the day, threatening our security and our economy, it is imperative that this committee pass the GRID Act so that we can move it forward and empower the FERC to move quickly to safeguard the electric grid from cyber threats that are not sufficiently addressed by industry. We should listen to FBI Director Mueller, to the FERC, and to the warnings coming from Russia and China. We should pass that. We should pass the GRID Act soon. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his comments, and we're now going to recognize the Chairman Emeritus of the Committee, Mr. Barton. Before I do that, I just want to say how important it is to have members who have been so engaged on this, and especially we're blessed to have Anna here, who served on the Intelligence Committee, and Mike Rogers, who chairs it now, and Lee Terry and Mr. Latta, and Mr. Murphy, who's not part of the subcommittee, but we're on the Cybersecurity Task Force the Speaker appointed. So all of that is most helpful as we tackle both of these issues. So I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Chairman Upton. I thought Mr. Markey was going to say the expert said the biggest threat to our grid was the EPA, but he went a different way with that. Back in 2006, Subcommittee Chairman Upton held a hearing on this very same issue, and as full committee chairman, he and I sent a letter to the GAO asking them to take a look at this issue. The response that we received then is the response that we're receiving today, and that is that it is quite possible that we could have a major attack, a cyber attack in this country that would dramatically affect our country. According to the Norton Cyber Crime Report for this last year, cybercrime is a $388 billion industry with 431 million adults experiencing at least one cybercrime in the last year. In another study, research has showed that the median annualized cost of cybercrime for companies is over $5.9 or $6 million a year, with the range being between $1.5 million to $36 million per year. Now, these are real numbers, real statistics, and those were for the year 2011. As we use the Internet more and more every day, it is absolutely imperative, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Eshoo, that we really take this seriously. And as you've pointed out and Anna's pointed out, it is good to have the Chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence on this subcommittee, because he has access to information that could be useful if and when we decide to legislate. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing. As you know, there is an EPA hearing downstairs in the Energy Subcommittee, so I'll be shuttling back and forth.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind yielding to Mr. Terry,
I will yield 2 minutes
and I think Ms. Blackburn
all right.
Comment, and maybe Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Barton and Mr. Chairman. This is an extremely important hearing in that we have to elevate the level of discussion and potential solutions. There is only one silver bullet that exists to prevent cyber crimes. That's to completely disconnect your computer from any network. Use it as a paperweight, maybe just play solitaire. That's it. If you are going to engage in any level of commerce using the Internet, you are at risk. And the only way we can do is try to minimize it. There is no silver bullet. Using why these folks are here today is for us to understand what tools may be available. In the Cyber Task Force, one of the things that we concluded is that the vast majority of everyday hackings can be maybe not prevented, but go a long way with just basic security features offered by private sector today or the networks or ISPs. But we got to have people to actually purchase those or use those tools. In fact, there was one incident in Omaha with our entity that controls our facilities that never thought that it was important to have those type of securities, and guess what? They were hacked and all of their information was stolen. But for then the next level is where it gets dicey. How do you protect people? How do they protect their data? We can't engage in setting the standards because, frankly, we set the standards before the ink's dry on the bill. The standards have changed. So you're here to help us understand what solutions may be available to minimize and help secure our infrastructure. And I want to thank you all for being here today. And does anybody else
Mr.
want
Rogers
48
and
seconds?
Ms. Blackburn.
Mr. Rogers.
Well, thank you very much. In the short time that we have, I can't tell you a more important issue. There's a lot of things that can keep you up as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and this one is one of the main ones. 80% of the attacks that happen every day can be prevented by the operator. It's those other 20% that are the devil in the details. Between criminal attacks, economic espionage, disruption, or attacking, as we would call it, on cybersecurity, we have a very real and present danger when it comes to cyber threats to our networks. Nobody is more integrated than the United States, and therefore we are more at risk than other countries. I do believe it is unprecedented in history that such a massive and sustained intelligence effort by a government to blatantly steal commercial data and intellectual property to use against the United States is well underway. We don't talk about it a lot because companies are reluctant to talk about it. The real number, we think, is closer to somewhere between $300 billion and $1 trillion in lost intellectual property per year. Countries like China are leading that charge. Russia is not far behind. Iran's capabilities are getting better. And the most concerned are non-nation states who are developing cyber capability to conduct disruption and attack activities against targets like the United States. All serious problems. I want to thank Anna Eshu. We did a seminar out at Stanford University on this very issue. I think it was well received. Her support of this bill is incredibly important. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses, and I appreciate you being here so that we can get to that next step and actually do something that helps us give a fighting chance against these cyber threats. I yield back, Mr.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, who is going to control Mr. Waxman's time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing. And I also like to welcome our witnesses here today and look forward to your testimony. There is no doubt that cyber attacks are real and continue to pose significant threats to several aspects of our economy. Communications networks are one of many areas that our nation must protect and ensure safety and soundness, particularly as we consider deploying an advanced nationwide broadband network for public safety. Advanced IP-based technologies in public safety communications heighten the concerns for cybersecurity. This new network, however, will share many of the same cyber concerns as any other network. This is something we have to take seriously and must protect. Moreover, our economy continues to experience ever-evolving ingenuity and innovation in the American technology industry. One of those technologies which will continue to play a prominent role in our economy, both in the public and private sector, is cloud computing. We're also seeing consumer cloud applications like the iCloud. As I see it, one of the key issues is the challenge of cybersecurity relating to the cloud. The challenge is to find the critical balance of continuing to foster American innovation and growth while combating cyber attacks. For the most part, the private sector will need to be up to the challenge of managing itself and its networks from potential cyber attacks. That said, I do believe that some balance may be appropriate, where the government must work together in partnership with the private sector on enhancing our nation's cybersecurity preparedness. Simply put, one cannot do it without the other. Small businesses, many of whom rely on the broadband economy, are also very susceptible to cyber attacks. In many instances, small businesses cannot fend off such attacks because they do not have a plan or lack the resources. Such an attack, though, would be very costly to their businesses. During this economic recovery, the last thing small businesses owners in my district and across the country need to worry about is a cyber attack that will hinder their business. I am pleased that the FCC recently launched a public-private partnership, the Small Biz Cyber Planner, which is an online tool that will allow small businesses to create customized cybersecurity plans. It is important that we continue to educate small businesses and the public in general about the risks that cybersecurity poses to small businesses, the government, and to our economy as a whole. I also believe a strong private-public partnership is critical to protecting against cyber attacks. It is my hope that partnership continues to foster moving forward. I look forward to exploring appropriate jurisdiction of this committee given the communications and technology relevance of cybersecurity. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and hope that we'll have future hearings in this subcommittee so that we can also hear more about the government's efforts to combat cyber attacks. Again, I thank the chairman for holding today's hearings, and I'd be happy to yield to anyone on our side if they would like to. Okay, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gently yields back the balance for your time. Thank you for your testimony. We'll now proceed to the witnesses. So we have a very distinguished panel. We thank you again for being here today to share the information you have in your testimony. And we're going to start with Mr. Bill Connor, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Entrust. Mr. Connor, thanks for your testimony, and we look forward to your comments.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's a privilege and honor to spend a morning here with you out of the cyber warfare game to discuss and educate what's happening below the screen. I like to focus my early comments on the arms race on one particular vector of security, and it's called man in the browser. That vector of security is probably the leading cyber stealer in the world today, and it's been around a while, and it's certainly impacting small, medium business, and it's certainly impacting the change of nature of stealing IP and money, both at a country state and at an organized crime state. Specifically, it's known as Zeus. It is commonly now combined with SpyEye. For those of you who don't know, Zeus was the original man-in-the-browser software. Started out of the Ukraine and Russia. It went under its own merger and acquisition by its lead competitor in the underground world called SpyEye. Their tools and technology were next generation. They merged in the fall of 2010 behind the scenes. As law enforcement started to attack it, the guy took his money and ran, combined it. In February of last year, that new code is out in the market. You can buy it off the internet and buy it with 24/7 support. So no longer do you have to be intelligent to write the code. You buy it, you pay for the support, and they will help you design your attack vector on which banks, which geographics you want to do. How does this technology work? It's real simple. It's very complicated. You cannot find it with the traditional software that you have on your desktop, whether it's in antivirus or the operating systems looking for it. It is cloaked software that is really targeted at small, medium business because it's targeted for money. This is a for-money game for them. What it basically does, it targets a small, medium business that probably doesn't have the technology or banking understanding with its supplier to understand how to deal with it. How does it work? I'm a treasurer at a small business. I go in online to my financial institution. I say I want to move $1,000 or $10,000, let's say $10,000 to a supplier. I have an agreement with my local bank to have online bill pay. I type that in, the bank sees that, but before the bank sees it, this software wakes up in the browser and changes the payees from one supplier to, let's say, 6 mules. It changes the dollar amount from $10,000 to $100,000. So what the bank sees is $100,000 going to 6 people. That bank says, guess what? We've got good security. You had your username and password. It's on your IP address in your network and your location. I'm going to send it back because I want a one-time passcode, 30-year-old technology that we're trying to apply to the digital world. It sends it back to the controller of your business and says, please confirm by putting your passcode in that's going to expire in 30 seconds that you authorize this transaction. That software wakes back up, converts that 100,000 back to 10, 6 payers back to 1. You type in your passcode, hit enter to send it back, and guess what? That $100,000 is now gone from the bank. You lose it, the bank loses it. 6 mules that are going to feed that money back into organized crime around the world are off and running. Unlike the personal side, where I'm protected by FDIC, my friends, you're protected as a small, medium business by nothing, the contract you've written. And if you look around this wonderful country of ours, there's no clear case law. There's case law on both sides of this, because the bank said, I did nothing. We've had cases overturned that even though a business had only done 4 transactions in the last year, and 20 transactions happened in 6 hours, totaling $2 million, when their line of online was only $500,000, that's what's happening. The good thing is the technology exists to deal with that today. The banks aren't doing it, and small businesses don't know what to do. So our belief is very straightforward. Much like quality, there wasn't a lexicon. To deal with cybersecurity, we need a lexicon. Much like quality, it ain't a one-time thing like year 2000. We need to do it over time. That's why education is critical. The second thing you must do is have public-private partnership. I co-chair the DHS piece. I can tell you the legislative laws around this do not work for anybody. And I think you've got to break public-private at different levels, from intelligence to the people like me that try to secure the U.S. government and others, to energy grids where Department of Energy works with those type of organizations. And finally, we must take a unified effort in public and private to defend this, because it is an arms race and it is a pace, as we mentioned it earlier. Thank you.
Mr. Connor, thank you. Excellent testimony. I think we're going to have to recess so we can all go deal with our own campaign accounts, and we'll be back in about an hour. We really appreciate it. We look forward to getting into questions with you and exploring it further. We're now going to go to Mr. Robert Dix, who's Vice President of Government Affairs and Critical Infrastructure Protection for Juniper Networks, which I believe is from your district. Do you want to?
Proudly.
Thank you. We're delighted to have you here. Thanks for coming the distance to share your wisdom with us, and please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify about cybersecurity. Juniper Networks is a publicly held private corporation, hardware and software manufacturer headquartered in Sunnyvale, California, with offices and operations around the world. Information technology and communications networks are embedded in all manner of the nation's critical infrastructure, including power plants and the electrical grid, water filtration systems, financial systems, and transportation networks, just to name a few. While sector-wide risk assessments conducted or being conducted in the IT and communication sectors validate that networks are resilient, it is important to acknowledge that the risk continues to grow and change, and our efforts to protect and prevent must be sustained and agile. In recognition of this reality, the private sector is working every day to protect against cyber threats through self-driven research and innovation, industry collaboration, and partnerships with government. Let me share just a few examples. In 2007, a group of private sector companies came together to address the issue of software assurance and improving the development process integrity of software and hardware products. SafeCode, the Software Assurance Forum for Excellence in Code, is a group of companies and subject matter experts that have set aside their competitive interest to gather and share industry best practices through a series of written deliverables that are available not just to the participating companies, but to the industry at large. Additionally, in 2008, a group of private sector companies came together to address the need for collaborative global incident response by forming ACASI, the Internet Consortium for Advancement of Security on the Internet. Once again, the participating companies who compete vigorously in the marketplace routinely share information in an effort to mitigate anomalous and abnormal network activity globally, because the cause is greater than any one company. Across the 18 critical infrastructure sectors, we have organizations such as ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, since 1988, working on the operational issues. Additionally, we have sector coordinating councils that were derived as a result of the National Infrastructure Protection Plan in 2006. And the Partnership for Critical Infrastructure Security is the cross-sector coordinating council representing all 18 critical infrastructure sectors and working with the Federal Senior Leadership Council under the NIP partnership framework to advance the mission of critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity. In fact, we are currently working with the administration on the implementation around Presidential Policy Directive 8 for national preparedness and the review and update of HSPD 7 regarding an all-hazards approach to critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity. Mr. Chairman, the number of users connecting to the Internet and other networks will continue to grow. Global Internet traffic is increasing at a rate of 40 to 50% a year and is expected to grow to 4 billion users in 2013. The explosion in the use of smartphones and tablets and the advent and growth in the use of social media is rapidly changing the workplace and how we communicate. Example, an average of 10,000 tweets per second the last 3 minutes of the Super Bowl on Sunday evening, while introducing cyber risks in a way that few of us could have imagined only a short time ago. This is the essence of technology. It enables us to do what we never could have imagined, and that includes those with nefarious motives. The convenience of technology has changed banking, purchasing, and the sharing of personal financial information. So it's only reasonable to expect that the conversation about cybersecurity must include a discussion about economics. But there are two sides to this coin. If we focus only on technology and technology development, we are likely to miss the opportunity to examine the challenges and impediments to technology and solution adoption. The market is delivering innovation at an unprecedented pace in history. However, the evidence would suggest that adoption of available solutions has not kept pace and should be a topic of further examination and discussion. Many low-cost and no-cost solutions are available to improve any user's protection profile. Accordingly, there are many things we can do together. It is reported by reliable sources that some 80% of the exploitable vulnerabilities are the result of poor or no cyber hygiene. For me, this is basic blocking and tackling. If we can raise the bar of protection, it makes it more difficult and more costly for the bad guys to do harm. When our nation was confronted a couple of years ago with the threat of the H1N1 virus, we mobilized as a nation to warn and advise folks how to protect themselves from the risk of infection. We have the opportunity to use that same model for a sustained awareness program to help educate citizens, small business, students, nonprofits, and other stakeholders how to protect themselves from the risk of malware, phishing, and other forms of infection in cyberspace. Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee, we must move beyond just thinking about the challenges of today to thinking about the risk profile of tomorrow. Today's cyber attacks are more complex and often difficult to detect and can target classes of users, even specific users, gaining access to valuable data and causing significant harm. With a commitment to working together in a collaborative manner, the United States will lead the effort to the protection, preparedness, and resilience of critical infrastructure and cybersecurity. On behalf of my colleagues across the industry and the proud employees of Juniper Networks, I thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you this morning. The threat is real, the vulnerabilities are extensive, and the time for action is now. The American people are counting on us to get this right, and the private sector looks forward to continuing the collaborative relationship between the Congress, the administration, and private industry on this important issue. Thank you.
Mr. Dix, thank you very much for sharing those comments with us. We'll now go to Dr. James A. Lewis, Director and Senior Fellow, Technology and Public Policy Program, Center for Strategic and International Studies. Dr. Lewis, thank you for being with us. We look forward to your testimony as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to testify. One thing that military and intelligence experts would agree on is that the cybersecurity problem is getting worse, not better. There's straightforward evidence that what we're doing now isn't working. Most of these experts also believe that we will not change our laws and policies until there is a crisis. I hope they're wrong. We all recognize the growing dependence of our economy on cyberspace and the risk this creates. Director of National Intelligence Clapper testified last week about how Iran, which is eagerly developing cyber attack capabilities, is losing its reluctance to attack the American homeland. FBI Director Mueller testified, as you heard, that the threat we face now comes from terrorism, but in a few years the bigger threat will come from cyber attack. The ability to launch damaging attacks is spreading from a few advanced nations to many countries and many hostile groups. There is disagreement among when hackers will disrupt critical services in the United States, but most estimates put it at sometime in the next couple of years. Cybercrime and espionage are rampant now, costing American jobs and damaging American economic competitiveness and national security. This morning, I was trying to think what I could say that would be a little different, and I remembered that I attended as a backbencher for the Director of Central Intelligence some of the first meetings in the Clinton administration on commercializing the Internet. Back then, we thought that it would be used for e-commerce, that it would be eBay and Amazon. We didn't expect a global network that would become the premier vehicle for espionage and a potential avenue for attack. We thought that if we made tools and information available, if we freed up encryption, companies and people would voluntarily secure the networks. I'm a little embarrassed sometimes when I see a paper I wrote for the White House in 1996 that said that, because I was wrong. We made the same mistakes in our approach to critical infrastructure protection. There were three big errors. The incentives for cybersecurity vary from company to company and sector to sector, and usually they're insufficient, right? There are legal obstacles that limit the ability of governments and companies to cooperate and to share information. And in any case, we need a coordinated defense, not a grab bag of individual actions. Finally, we did not expect to face world-class opponents, or as you heard from some of the earlier testimony, even, mid-range opponents with access to world-class tools. We overestimated incentives and underestimated threats and legal obstacles. And I'd like to point out that Congressman Rogers' bill would be very useful if we could get it passed in removing some of the legal obstacles that hamper our ability to provide an adequate cyber defense. A serious defense requires coordination and mandatory action. The big telecom companies are pretty good at securing themselves and don't need more regulation, but the other sectors are in bad shape. Some people say regulation is burdensome, but if we do not hold critical infrastructure to mandatory standards, we guarantee a successful attack. Nor does regulation damage innovation. An unregulated internet is not a substitute for a business-friendly environment that innovation really needs. Partnership and cooperation must become more than an exchange of slogans. Australia has a good model. We heard about that with where the government encouraged internet security service providers, to develop a code of conduct to deal with malware. That appears to be working. We're considering in the U.S. similar options. Finding ways to expand the use of DNSSEC. DNSSEC is a good story. We identify this is a fundamental rule set to the addressing framework for the internet. We identified problems with it 20 years ago. We identified fixes for it 12 years ago. We have not implemented these fixes. This is when we're finding some new approach to get people to move faster would be really crucial. The Defense Industrial Base Initiative, which shares classified threat information, is another good example of how to do real cooperation. There are many opportunities to improve cybersecurity, but taking advantage of them will require a new approach. I think one thing I can say is everyone wants to make things better. We all realize the scope of the problem, and everyone wants to do stuff. Hearings like this provide an opportunity to find that new approach that will truly serve national security. I thank the committee for the opportunity and look forward to your questions.
Dr. Lewis, thank you. We appreciate your testimony, and we'll have a few for you, especially on the Australia model. We're going to go now to Mr. Larry Clinton, President, Chief Executive Officer of Internet Security Alliance. Mr. Clinton, thank you for being here today. We look forward to your comments.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. There's been a dramatic change in the cyber threat picture in the last 18 to 24 months. Our main concern are not hackers or kids in basement. The fact that a cyber system has been breached is no longer the metric that determines whether or not an attack has been successful. Cyber attacks have grown increasingly sophisticated, using what's commonly referred to now as the Advanced Persistent Threat, or the APT. APT attackers are pros. They're highly organized, well-funded, often state-supported expert attackers who use coordinated sets of attacking methods, both technical and personal. Perhaps most indicative of these attacks is if they target a system, they will almost invariably compromise or breach it. Unfortunately, conventional information security defenses don't work against the APT. Attackers are successfully evading all antivirus intrusion and traditional best practices, remaining inside the target's network while the target believes they've been eradicated. This doesn't mean that we have no defense. It means that we need to modernize our notion of what constitutes cyber defense. Traditional approaches, including federal regulation, will not solve the problem because they're going to be largely reactive and will not stay ahead of the changing threat nature. Worse, bad regulation could be counterproductive, leading companies to expend their limited resources on building in-house efforts to meet regulatory demands rather than focusing on security. Fundamental to stopping the advanced threat is to understand that our biggest problems are not technological, they are economic. Independent research has consistently shown that the single biggest barrier to combating the cyber threat is cost. President Obama's Cyberspace Policy Review said, many technical and management solutions that would greatly enhance our security already exist in the marketplace, but are not being used because of cost and complexity. Just last week, Bloomberg released an extensive study that found that to reach an acceptable, not ideal, acceptable level of security and critical infrastructure would require a 91% increase in spending. The private sector has been extremely responsive to combating the cyber threat. Average spending on cybersecurity in the telecommunications industry is $67 million a year, with governance, by the way, being including regulatory compliance, being the single biggest thought. Despite the fact that our critical infrastructure is under constant attack, we have never had an instance of serious breakdown, mass deaths, evacuations, economic catastrophe, similar to what we've seen in the environmental arena. This success is due in a large part to the flexibility generated by the current system, which relies on voluntary partnerships, wherein industry understands and can manage the systems best and use their intimate knowledge to respond rapidly to emerging threats in a fashion they believe can best protect the system rather than being driven by a preset government directive. Nevertheless, there's a great deal that Congress can do and the Commerce Committee can do to improve our cybersecurity right now. First of all, we need to get the government's house in order. The National Academy of Sciences, the GAO, and just last week the DOE Inspector General have all documented systemic problems in managing government cyberspace. These need to be addressed immediately. Second, we need to provide the right mix of incentives and regulation. For industries where the economies of the industry are tied directly to a regulatory format, such as electric utilities, water, transportation, etc., the current regulatory structure can be used to motivate and fund needed cyber advancements. For industries where the economics are not inherent to a regulatory structure, adding a new regulatory structure will impede innovation and investment, making us less secure. In these sectors, we need to motivate by providing appropriate market incentives to spur greater security and investment. An excellent example of this approach is Mr. Rogers' bill, which passed the Intelligence Committee a couple of weeks ago, which uses liability reforms to stimulate additional information sharing. However, liability reform is only one of many incentives that need to be unleashed to help us secure our cyber networks. Other incentives include better use of government procurement, streamlining regulation in return for demonstrated security improvements, greater use of private insurance, streamlined permitting, licensing, Stafford Act access. This incentive-based approach was spelled out in some detail in the ISA's Cybersecurity Social Contract in 2008 and was also endorsed by President Obama in the Cyberspace Policy Review in 2009, by the Multi-Trade Association and Civil Liberties Coalition White Paper on Cybersecurity in 2010, and the House Task Force report in 2011. A great deal of work needs to be done to fill out how these incentive models can be used in the various sectors. In the meantime, Congress ought to enact FISMA reform, ought to do the Rogers Information Sharing Bill, and should do a good deal to better coordinate amongst themselves. Passing that package of cybersecurity reforms would be a historic and politically achievable goal. Ladies and gentlemen of the Commerce Committee, you're dealing with the invention of gunpowder. Mandating thicker armor is not going to work any more than building deeper moats was going to stop the hoarders, and the invaders who invented catapults, or the Maginot Line was able to stop the Germans in World War II. We need a different approach. We need a contemporary and creative approach that engages the private sector with government, not having the government control what the private sector does. We really look forward to continuing to work with you.
Mr. Clinton, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. Our next and final witness today is Phyllis Schneck, who is Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of the Global Public Sector McAfee Incorporated. Dr. Schneck, thank you for being here today. We look forward to your comments.
Good morning, Chairman Walden and Good morning, Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eshoo, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning, and thank you for your interest in cybersecurity as it applies to the telecom sector. My testimony will focus this morning on 4 areas: the threat landscape, the communications sector's unique role in cybersecurity, private sector technologies, and policy recommendations to enable greater cross-sector cyber resilience. First, just a bit of background. My technical background is high-performance computing and cryptography. I was raised in this back to the days of the radio tower. My father's one of the first in supercomputing in this country and taught me to write code. I know how to exploit code, but I was taught the responsibility of that and the responsibility of the computing power that we have, and I'm focused on and passionate about protecting that and protecting good science. Also focused on partnership. Outside of McAfee as a volunteer, I ran the private sector side of the FBI's InfraGard program, about which Director Mueller has testified several times. Ran that for 8 years and grew that program from 2,000 subject matter experts across the critical infrastructure sectors to 33,000. And today chair the National Board of Directors for the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance, which brings together the top fraud analysts from the banking sector, telecom, pharmaceuticals, and others with the FBI under the same roof and other organizations in government to do analytics that have helped to arrest 400 cyber criminals worldwide in the past 2 years. A little bit about McAfee. We are based in Santa Clara. We're the world's largest dedicated security company. We protect business, governments, and consumers all over the world from the full spectrum of cybersecurity attacks. We're a trusted partner and advisor on cybersecurity throughout the world, and as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Intel Corporation, enjoy driving that innovation that goes directly to the hardware. The buck stops at the hardware. So the adversaries can get in several different ways, but when a piece of hardware knows not to execute a malicious instruction, that's when we have the enemy. As you've heard this morning, the cyber threat landscape has evolved. Obviously, it's not a dormant activity anymore. It's more mass espionage. There are two kinds of companies and agencies across the world, in public sector and private, those who know they're owned and those who don't. We're looking at the mass movement of money markets and jobs between countries and companies, and we're looking at the threat of destruction should they desire. This enemy is faster and smarter than we are at times. They're certainly faster. They have no intellectual property boundaries, no legal boundaries, no policy boundaries, and in many cases they have plenty of money. They have absolutely no obstacles to execute on our infrastructure, which leads us to the role of the Internet service providers. In the days when I sent my first packets between my sister's room and mine, there was nothing in that route except one address on the other. Now we have an unknown set of routes, but we have an ability and a great infrastructure run by the ISPs that deliver our traffic and that of the adversary very reliably. So the enemy has now used our great cyber infrastructures that we've built as the good guys over the world as a mass executive transport system for malware. They haul packets at high speed. They do a great job. They're fairly secure, as was mentioned earlier, but the current Internet architecture allows everything to get delivered to the grid, to the banks, to the rest of the critical infrastructure. ISPs can play a key role in better cybersecurity. They're already doing some of this, but they have some challenges. One thing they can do is help detect this traffic in the network fabric and use some global threat intelligence to do that, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But imagine if our network fabric was smart enough not to route the traffic of an adversary and only to route good traffic. Secondly, demand more secure technologies and equipment from the market. Demand that those technologies are armed with proactive technologies to not let a malicious instruction run. And third, ISPs can't carry the burden alone. As was said earlier, it's up to every system to be hardened, up to every company and user to harden their enterprise, and good cyber hygiene plays a role in that. What are the challenges that the ISPs face today? Just to name a couple, you have things such as the Stored Communications Act of 1986, a little while ago, that was before I sent my first packet, that prevents sharing information outside of the telecoms. So imagine the difficulty in enabling the global threat picture that the enemies use. We can't make that rule because legally we can't combine our information together. Secondly, it costs a lot of money. Clean bandwidth costs money, and users aren't willing to pay that difference. So we need some help, leading to some policy recommendations and some proactive technologies. First and foremost, we can put threat intelligence together and map a global cyber radar map of where the enemy is at any time. At McAfee, across 160 million endpoints, we see a risk profile on every IP address on the Internet. Other companies do this, telecoms do this, governments can do this if we can share that information together and make a global threat picture. And prevent those malicious instructions from running, whether it's application whitelisting or working with the hardware. Keep the enemy out. So for the policy recommendations, we support the recommendations in Representative Thornberry's work, certainly with information sharing, insurance reforms, and tax credits, and certainly in the bill of Representative Rogers and Representative Ruppersberger, enabling the government to finally facilitate the good information sharing, to put that information together, to not only provide liability protections, protections for privacy and for civil liberties, but to balance out the advantage that adversary has had over us up to now. Let the government facilitate that collaboration so we can build that global threat picture, feed it back into the network fabric, and have it grow as a living, breathing immune system to feed us the information in return. ISPs play a central role in the global digital infrastructure. They can help us. We can help them. We have to work on this legal and policy framework for global information sharing. And thank you very much for requesting McAfee's views on these issues. I look forward to answering any questions.
Very impressive testimony. Thank you. Thanks for all the work you do to try and keep us secure. We'll now go into our question phase. And I wonder, Mr. Clinton, you talked about incentives, and we're fairly specific. Can you dive down a little deeper in terms of what that means, in terms of more specifics on the incentives that would make a difference here?
Certainly. Thank you. We are supportive of the approach that was articulated in the House Task Force report, which suggests that a menu of incentives need to be developed because different industries are responsive to different things. The defense industrial base may be attracted by a procurement incentive. The banking industry may be by an insurance incentive. The utilities perhaps by getting rid of some of the outdated regulation that is based in an analog form rather than is digitalized. So you need to have a set of incentives. On the other hand, you need to have some agreement as to what needs to be incentivized. And for that, what we have suggested and is in the Multi-Trade Association paper that I spoke of before, is that we need to have some independent entity which does not create the standards or practices, but simply evaluates the standards and practices, an underwriter's laboratory for cybersecurity, if you will. And then organizations would choose to elect a higher or lower level of adoption based on their business plan, and their business plan would be improved because they would have access to lower liability costs, lower insurance, better chance to get a federal contract, et cetera. So we're saying that we need a new system, not a government mandate system, but a system where there are government roles, such as providing the incentives, and there are independent roles, something like this underwriter's laboratory, and then responsibility for the owners and operators. Now, in those sectors of the economy where the economics is already built into a regulatory model, then you can use that regulatory model. You don't need a new regulatory model. You can use it. For example, if you're dealing with the utilities, they have generally a fairly detailed regulatory structure. The problem that they're having is that they get mandates at one level and the funding comes at another level. So there's going to have to be a correlation, done on the government side. But basically, we think you need an independent set of entities indicating what needs to be incentivized. That can be done on a continuing basis. Government needs to provide the incentives, and industry needs to implement them.
All right, very helpful. Thank you. Dr. Schneck, so when you and your sister were trading packets, when you should have been sleeping, obviously, doing their homework, doing your homework, turn out the lights. That was when this threat was really computer to computer. Now we understand it to be bigger than that, broader than that, in whole networks that can be taken down. So can you describe just what those threats look like and what should happen there?
Absolutely. We did that over a 1200 baud modem over a phone line.
I remember a 300 baud modem where you put the phone in the little coupler.
The Silent 700?
Yeah.
Right. So the threat really looks at an instruction that executes off the site of memory, not the piece of memory in your computer that holds some word processing program, but it's where your computer grabs the next instruction. What do I do next? At the root of every exploit or attack, it's I'm controlling my will on your machine. Whether I'm telling your machine to send out a lot of traffic or adjust something that might change the settings on something that controls circuit relays on an industrial control system, I'm allowing you, my will is being changed on your machine. I'm executing on your machine. So these, as was pointed out earlier, you can buy these exploits on the net. You can even leash botnets together in a screen that looks like it came off of Quicken. It's a spreadsheet. And you can choose addresses to which to send it. You're simply relying on someone else's construction of a piece of code, and we see in McAfee Labs 66,000 new variants of these pieces of code every day called malware that allow my will to be instructed on your machine. So the idea is, well, it's twofold. One is to catch the IP addresses that are spreading it across the Internet, and that goes to that threat position, sharing that global threat picture. I can't forecast the weather without the weather from all the different states or countries, and that comes from enabling the information sharing, but also the ability to detect an instruction that's doing something it shouldn't do. That's when we have resilience means I can run even if the enemy gets in. So the enemy will get in. The biological analogy is the disease is in your body, but it'll never hurt you. So we have to let many instructions get in, because they will, and simply be resilient to that. And that's the ability to work at the operating system level instead of having to judge every instruction, say, are you good or bad, because we've shown that's not effective. Just know what's good and don't let anything else run. that's known as application whitelisting in the community. And then down at the hardware level, understand what an instruction should be accessing or shouldn't, and just block it, and we can do that.
I'm glad you're on our side.
Thank you.
And Mr. Connor, as you were talking about Zeus merging with SpyEye, some of us wondered maybe that should have gone through like an FCC approval process for a merger, and it would have never happened. All right, now we get serious. I'm going to turn now to my friend and colleague from California who brings so much to this discussion and debate, Ms. Eshu, for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, I want to thank you, each one of you, for your outstanding testimony. I think that this is one of the best panels that's been assembled on a given subject matter, and it's highly instructive. I can't help but feel that this is like trying to get socks on an octopus, though. I mean, it's massive, and there are. I think that we all have a pretty good sense of what the threat is. I don't think that we have a clear picture of really what to do with it. There are so many agencies. There was a mention of a 1986 law that I want to hear more about. We've talked about public-private partnerships. We know that 95% of this is in the private sector, 5% in the government. Where do we begin with this? What are the legal roadblocks, as any of you see them right now, that are holding us back to do what my next question would be, what's the new paradigm? And if we have very good pieces in place right now, what do we keep? What should we get rid of? And to Dr. Schneck, do you agree with this notion of Mr. Clinton's of an underwriter's lab? That sounds very interesting to me. So I don't know who wants to begin with what. Maybe with legal roadblocks that you know of. I think it was Dr. Schneck that were you the one that mentioned the 1986 law? I'm not familiar with that and what it's blocking.
So I'm not a lawyer.
Neither am I. So maybe.
But I think the overall premise and the reason I mention that is because the adversary has the ability to act on us very quickly because they have no roadblocks. We have the ultimate weapon, and that is we own the infrastructure that works at the speed of light. And if we can put the instructions together and the intelligence together to work as your body does, it attacks a virus that comes in because it knows it doesn't belong there. It doesn't need to have a meeting to do so. We need the internet to work the same way. So the routers and the machines that route our traffic, they need to understand that something's bad. And to do that, we have to replace the chemical and biology with the intelligence from data. And that means getting data from all sides of the equation that we control. From the private sector, we have to be able to combine that with government with data in the government sector. Not even in the classified realm. That would help, but this is all unclass. And then some of those laws actually prevent the ISPs from combining that data together. I don't have the answer legally on how to make that work. While also preserving the civil liberties and privacy, which are crucial. But we have to find a way to put together at the indicator level, this address, this location could hurt you, that simply, and make that accessible to a router at several hundred gigabits per second.
Now, what you just described, would that fit in with Mr. Clinton's idea of an underwriter's lab or not?
I think it's different. I think
it's different.
Necessary.
Yeah.
Does anyone ever tell you that you look like David Gergen? I keep looking at you, and I thought, he reminds me of someone. But
I'm pretty flattered. I hear David is upset when the comparison is made. I agree with Phyllis. I think that it's we're talking about kind of different things. First of all, with respect to the legal issues, after he got elected, President Obama appointed Melissa Hathaway to do a 60-day cyber review in the National Security Council staff, and the largest portion of that is Appendix A, which is a thick document going through all of the legal barriers that need to be reviewed. So that's a place to start. Essentially what we have here is we have a whole bunch of laws that were written for an analog world,
right,
and we are now in a digital world. I mean, we have still laws on the books dealing with how you manage your videotapes. I haven't had a videotape in quite a while. So there's a lot that can be done to work out that legal underbrush and modernize things. We've suggested some of those things are regulatory and could be offered as incentives, to get away from some of these burdens. Mm-hmm. Some of them, for example, are duplicative auditing requirements. We're all for auditing, but we should have one unified cybersecurity audit, and you pass that audit, and you don't have to do the rest of the audits. Mm. But there are multiple state, local, federal, different agencies that are involved in this, so organizations are spending a lot of their time and money doing redundant things. We should strip away a whole bunch of those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. The last thing on where you start, I would strongly suggest that Congress start by cleaning up the federal government's roles and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. That's a much more limited system. You can make a lot of progress really quickly while we're continuing to work with the public-private partnership model that we currently have.
Good. Thank you. I'm out of time, so thank you.
Let
me.
Your mic's still on. I'll yield to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry. Before I do so, it strikes me we ought to get this Appendix A and maybe have a task force of this subcommittee that really gets into the weeds in that more deeply. And we've got people who have great experience here. So
where do we start, Mr. Clinton?
Well, as I said, I would start, first of all, at the federal level. We need to straighten out roles and responsibilities in the federal government and between government at the federal, local, and state level. So, for example, I mentioned the problem that we have in the utility sector where we have mandates that exist at one level, but funding comes at another level. And what we have to do is realize that solving some of this cybersecurity problem is going to cost us some money. Unfortunately, when you have state public utility commissioners, they are resistant to increasing, the rate base, and this is understandable, but we have to find some way to get a pass-through on some of these things. So I think a good review and scrubbing of the governmental issues is one place to start. Simultaneously, we have a lot of activity already going through the public-private partnership that can use a number of these things. Mr. Rogers' bill is a good example. And then I think we need a really concentrated effort on working on these other incentive programs that I've started. Exactly what do we need to do with the insurance industry to get them to be bigger players? Exactly what?
In what way?
Well, private insurance is one of the most effective pro-social motivators we have. People drive better, they give up smoking, etc.
So cyber insurance from attack?
Cyber insurance, sure. So that if the problem that we have in insurance, there's a couple of problems, but one of the problems is we don't have enough actuarial data because the data is being held.
Doesn't Google have all of that?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. No.
A lot of the insurance guys would like to
you guys were so good at humor. I tried it.
A lot of the insurance guys would like to share data, but this runs into antitrust problems, okay? Because then they'd be sharing data for rates. But actually, if we could get them to share that, perhaps in a public-private partnership, we would get a more realistic view of what the threat is. Right now, they set everything at maximum. But if we share data, we could get a more realistic view of what the threat is. We think this would bring down insurance rates. When you bring down insurance rates, more people will buy the insurance. When more people are buying the insurance, more insurance companies will get it, and we get a virtuous cycle going on. And we can use insurance to motivate better cybersecurity investment.
All right. Mr. Dix, one question for you, and you can add on wherever you want. But you mentioned that most, for everyday users, small businesses, it's just a matter of cyber hygiene. So I say, okay, you pull out your soap and you wash. What does that really mean? And what can you do? What can we do as small business people or whatever?
So again, as I mentioned, I think we need a comprehensive and sustained national education and awareness campaign that tells the user constituencies how better to protect themselves from the infection in cyberspace. Leveraging the resources of the federal government, such as the Small Business Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, the U.S. Postal Service, and other agencies that interact with citizens and businesses every day would be a place to help message that. Creating and leveraging a model like we did with H1N1, where we have a sustained plan of public service announcements that drive people to a place where they can get information. It might even be nice if every member of Congress had a link on their constituent webpage that directed folks to the National Cybersecurity Alliance or the Internet Security Alliance as a place to learn basic best practices, low cost or no cost, things that they can do to protect themselves. if I might add, another piece of the fundamental blocking and tackling is to ensure an operational capability that presents something like a National Weather Service or a CDC capability where we have a picture into what's going on in the networks at all times, in steady state and in points of escalation. I raise that because many of us worked together through the National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee and delivered a report to the President in May of 2009 that recommended the creation of a joint coordination center, a joint public-private integrated 24/7 operational capability to improve detection, prevention, and mitigation. We've got to get on front of this. Most of our time now is spent in response and recovery. Part of the problem we ran into, legal barriers. Once we got into trying to integrate, we developed a model in the private sector. Once we began to try and integrate that capability with the government, the lawyers told us they couldn't talk to us, they couldn't share this information. Hopefully Representative Rogers' bill will help break down some of those barriers, but we should have an operational capability that has a picture as to what's going on in the network at all times, and we have those kinds of data feeds available. Organizing them and having a National Weather Service or CDC type of capability is long overdue.
Gentleman's time has expired. I believe Mr. Waxman is next for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Schneck, what special, and anybody else who wants to respond to this question, what special considerations do the growing use of smartphones and tablets present?
So thank you. Several smartphones and tablets are just small computers, right? They have the exact same vulnerabilities that all the other machines have that you're used to. And they probably have they have tens of thousands of times the memory in them that the guidance systems that took our first rockets, Apollo rockets, to the moon. So when you think about the power that's in your hand, you now have the ability twofold. One is it enables the enemy to, if it's not secured appropriately, it enables an adversary to use it as a platform to get into your enterprise network. Right, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, simplify this a lot, but people are wanting to use the home device at work. And what happens is they want the adversaries discovered they can use that unprotected home device that happily houses angry birds and launch an attack into the enterprise network because companies are letting folks use the small devices. So there are technologies to lock that down. We do a lot of that. We manage that worldwide. But you're looking at a massive explosion of small devices. The lady mentioned the cloud. These devices leverage the cloud because they don't have as much processing power as the big machine. So most of your processing is done in the cloud. You have to pay extra attention to the security on that data and motion data at rest and shared resources where your data are when they're not on the phone. Your personal information, most likely, is all over that phone, pictures of your friends and family, location. If you lose it, you want to make sure you have a remote capability to destroy that. It's a wonderful device, but it's access to, again, all the critical infrastructure if you happen to work in one and it's talking to your network, and it's access to now your personal information. So I think it brings a wonderful new, I spoke about this at the Consumer Electronics Show, it brings a wonderful new sense of fun to computing, and it also brings some new dangers that we need to quote my colleagues here, get out in front of before this is yet another massive vector because mobility is multiplying.
Just real quickly, every once in a while I talk to hackers just to see what they're up to. And recently one of them told me that the price for a toolkit to hack an iPhone is about $200,000 on the black market. And he said for other phones it's only $10,000. So, I don't know. What this is going to do, though, is it's going to force us to pay more attention to the service providers, to the big telcos, to the ISPs, to the cable companies. Responsibility is going to shift away from the edge, away from the consumer, to the service provider. You don't patch your cell phone. You don't program it. You depend on computing is becoming a service, and that will change the contours of security and change the requirements for regulation.
With all due respect, I disagree with that. If you look at Metcalfe's law, and if you look at just what happened with Apple and AT&T, the value has shifted. It shifted from the carriers to the endpoints. And this is about identity. And I'll give you a good example. The threat I talked about, going out of band or using a mobile network and a device is a surefire way to stop that kind of transaction today. And it is safe and it's protected. It uses digital signature through a wireless carrier network and on a mobile device with digital signature, which is probably why to try to hack the device costs a heck of a lot more on an iPhone or iPad than a normal phone. And if you use that, probability is on that attack vector today you won't break it. So I think there are good pieces, and I think my personal experience, the minute you think you're going to stop all this in the network, the ID and IP address is no longer the identity. The number one thing people fake is who you are, what you are, and the application of who you are. And that is the hardest thing to combat in terms of good guys versus bad guys. The threat I showed you is not the identity of the person that's doing it. He has faked your identity. And no perimeter technology, no network can deal with that till they deal with the endpoint itself.
I don't think we're disagreeing, though. I think that you're going to see that the authentication technologies you're talking about will depend ultimately on the service provider.
Okay, thanks. Well, let me ask one question, and I know I don't have much time, but many of you mentioned in your testimony how communications networks are central to most other critical infrastructure sectors. How does this then relate to the importance of this committee in addressing cybersecurity of communications networks? Anybody want to respond to that?
Since it's our jurisdiction. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that in the opening remarks, a few of you mentioned some of the things that are going on that at NTIA, at FCC, that could reduce risk, right? And one of the examples we've heard about is, of course, this measure to get the internet service providers to adopt a voluntary code of conduct for dealing with malware. It's a good thing to do. It's sort of basic level stuff. The FCC has an effort to promote the use of DNS security, DNSSEC. And this is, not to get too complicated, but this is a growing vulnerability. It's relatively easy to fix. Other countries have moved faster than the U.S., something that we can probably do on a collaborative basis. The third thing to look at is some of the responsibilities for other activities, other protocols. This is a place where you don't want the government creating technology, right? It's not for this kind of level of technology, but you do want it maybe coordinating a response. And so when you look at FCC, when you look at NTIA, the DNSSEC, the ISP efforts, some of the other measures, Commerce is doing similar things. This is where you can play a big role.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With the committee's indulgence, we were all going to ask you about the Australia
model.
and then we all forgot. Would you, without objection, would you mind just addressing the Australia?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Phyllis talked about this as well. Your ISP probably has a pretty good idea of what's going on your computer at home, right? And right now, they don't really do very much about it. And I think Bob talked about this as well. You know, there's basic hygiene things that most people don't do. Your ISP has fairly good knowledge when you're running malware, when you're part of a botnet. Not perfect knowledge, but good knowledge. What actions can they take to stop that? And in Australia, Australia's not the only country that does this anymore. At one point they thought the Attorney General will come in and tell the ISPs what to do, right? Because the ISPs were not doing anything. This was a failure of incentives, right? And there was a tussle, political tussle. At the end of the day, the ISPs, in Australia's a little easier because it's a smaller country. They said, how about if we come up with a voluntary code of conduct that will let us deal with the malware threat, right? And with a little guidance and help, involvement from the Attorney General and the Australian Federal Police, which is roughly equivalent to some of our federal agencies, they came up with a pretty good system. It works pretty well. This will not deal with the advanced threat, but it will deal with the, quick, name the country in the world that is the biggest supplier of botnets used in cybercrime. It's the United States. And it's not because we're cyber criminals, it's because we're incompetent in our defenses. The Australian model changes that. We're number one. Hey, great. There's some issues, and I'll just do them quickly. Other countries that do this, Germany, Germans have a lighter approach. What happens in Germany is you get a little pop-up on your screen that says basically, we notice you're infected, call this number if you want help, right? The Australians and some of the other countries that do this say, click here and we will clean your computer for you. A few other places that don't go public, they just intervene without your knowledge. you have a privacy issue. You've got to be careful about that. One of the things that comes up over and over again is, should we isolate infected computers? Should we cut infected users off from the internet? Some companies are beginning to do this. You're putting such a burden on me that I'm just going to cut you off. But big issue, right? If you look at the data places where we have data, there's an amazing drop in the rate of infection, right? So this works, and it would be useful if we followed the Australians, the Germans, the Japanese, the Turks, any number of countries.
I'll give you two other points on Australia that are, I think, relevant to this group. Australia is also looking at their energy grid, and granted their energy grid is a little different architecture than the U.S., more like Ireland and others. But in the process that we're working with them, they're starting with the infrastructure part and the actual production side of the energy creation. One, to lock down the authentication of the employees and the systems within the creation of the power, and starting there, and then going to the export of that power through the grid as it extends through the different carriers all the way to the endpoint in terms of that. I think they're also, that we're involved with, and that we're involved with other companies here in the U.S. helping them do that. The other piece is as they look at healthcare, they think that's a critical area in terms of being able to have healthcare cards. Novel idea when you get to privacy concerns here, but as I say, you can't have privacy without security and policy.
All right. Thank you. And thanks to the indulgence of the committee. I'm going to go to Mr. Raj. Oh, Dr. Schneck, I'm sorry. Go ahead if the committee's okay with that.
One point, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that the example in Australia is a beautiful example of this need for information sharing. I'm going to challenge the wording a little bit from Dr. Lewis, and I don't think you meant it this way, but the ISPs don't know what's going on your computer. They're not watching your banking. They're not watching you work. They see, because they own that block of addresses, they see the behavior from that block of addresses as a footprint as it tries to send traffic, which the ISPs are able to track to protect you from malware. They see that footprint, just like McAfee sees it, reflect on things they own. And from that, they can see where traffic has come in, for example, a ridiculously large volume in a short period of time from a certain set of machines. And they can look at those machines and say these are infected with certain code. And they can then, in the Australian model, let you know. And so the question becomes, how do they let you know? I think it's a great example of the use of that intelligence picture. It shows how with Representative Rogers' work, we could actually get a larger intelligence picture. That's what makes for the humans, the pretty weather map picture that Mr. Dix recommends. But also, you have the ability now to look at who's infected where and start looking at these incentives. How do we incentivize the general public to do this hygiene? Most people with a computer don't know what it does all night when they're sleeping. If they knew, they'd clean it up. It's not that hard. So I think this is a really neat exercise in the information sharing and the incentives.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the committee's indulgence in just trying to get some more information out here. Mr. Rogers, thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we have short on time. Mr. Connor, are you familiar with the company DigiNotar, or what used to be the company DigiNotar?
Very much so.
Yeah, and signatures and attribution is very, very difficult. Although I think we're getting better, it's pretty difficult. Can you briefly, I think it would be good for the committee to hear the story of DigiNotar and
Great question.
How a viable company went away in about a month after being hacked, and what it does quickly, and what happened, and why this is important as we move forward.
Yeah, so if you look at the internet when it was created, the little yellow lock, everyone sees the little yellow lock on their browser and on their PC, and they think they're safe. Very few people know what that little yellow lock means. And what it's supposed to mean is the communication path is secure between you and the website that you're communicating with and who's on each end of that. The problem is in the SSL world, which is kind of the security level of that, the identity on each side of that may or may not be who it is reported to be. We co-chaired, along with VeriSign, a new standard on that called extended validation, because if you go to your Super Bowl even this past week, you will see people advertising, hosting, and selling that little yellow lock for $19 for your business website. Only problem is the verification of who on the end of that is pretty lax. They just look at the server and go, oh, well, that must be you. So the issue was this one company that provides the little yellow lock, in this case predominantly in the Netherlands, was breached, and they were breached from Iran. Just like many other security vendors have been breached, we get a target every day from country states, our little 350-person company with no help to the U.S. government, thank you very much, to defend that. Well, this little company got attacked, just like Komodo did, just like others did, and they breached that little yellow lock that said who they were, and they began to take down the government security because that government used the little yellow lock for all its online capabilities. And the people in Iran, guess what, used that little yellow lock to say they were Google and other people. So anyone in Iran that was Googling content in that country was able to give up to the Iranian government whatever they were looking at, whatever they were doing. And one government was basically shut down for at least 60 days. And unfortunately, to those of us in the security world, we found out about it through the browser forum, and actually Entrust was a partner to that group, and it ended our relationship with them prior to that, and even we weren't notified. So that talks about, to your question of the legal framework of what's going on here and the disclosure requirements and what's happening beneath the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just think that was a great example of a nation state using its intelligence services to co-opt something like that. And by the way, DigiNotar is no longer a company. So if you want to
it's out of business.
You want to talk about the cost, there is a hack that took this company and is now out of business. So
well, be careful, be careful. It was a subsidiary of a public business that still exists that acts like it didn't happen.
But the contracts that it has in the Netherlands no longer exist.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
That's exactly correct.
It's an American company that actually owned it.
That's right.
And DigiNotar isn't established and is no longer.
And I think the point that you're on, Congressman, is an important one. There are ways of we've been attempted to be hacked by this same group. We've watched them try that over the last 12 months. Two of the people that own the yellow locks in the U.S. and abroad have been taken down relative to Iran being able to break in and impersonate those pieces. So it's happening every day.
So you can see how I thought it was important for the committee to hear that particular case because it shows how sophisticated and how dangerous it can be if somebody has a nefarious purpose other than criminal. Criminal's bad enough. This was other than criminal. And I see my time is almost up, so I'm going to ask two questions and close up. Mr. Lewis, I'd like you to talk about, we've been through this a long time. It's been very difficult to get to a place where we have a very narrow focus on how to move to the next step. Just talk about the challenges of why we think it's been difficult to even get a very narrow change in the law. And lastly, Dr. Schneck and maybe Mr. Dix can talk about this. You talked about hardware. There is much concern about hardware entering our system that may be malicious and very difficult for us to understand exactly what that hardware is doing in our systems. And I'm hoping you can talk about that and what we might be able to do from a regulatory and or cautionary position on the behalf of the United States government to make sure that those type of hardware systems don't enter our system and some of our hardware systems are not exposed when they leave this country to manipulation by foreign nation states. And I'll leave it at that. Those are two questions I hope you can ask. And if the chairman's kind enough to let you answer them would be great.
Thank you, because those are hard questions. They're great questions, but I'm glad Phyllis got one of them. So, the neutral answer is to say when you look at a new technology, it usually takes the U.S. somewhere between 20 and 50 years to figure out how to get it in order. So if you look at airplanes, steamboats, railroads, electricities, cars, we're in year 18 for the Internet. So we're not doing too bad, I guess. I mean, we have a couple of years to sort this out. A little more pointed answer, we have so many old ideas. They have not gone away. If it was in PDD 63, which was the Clinton administration policy, and we're still trying it, it doesn't work. Give it up, right? And the second thing is, as you've heard, we've had old laws that are real obstacles. You, of course, are trying to fix this, but if it's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act designed for dial telephones, you have serious issues here. You have business issues, you have privacy issues, so it's a hard problem, and it will take time to work out. But the prevalence of the old thinking and the difficult legal environment we have has really slowed us down and put us at risk.
Mr. Dix or Dr. Schneck?
First of all, I'd like the record to reflect that Mr. Lewis and I agree on that last. Thank you. So first of all, let me just touch on the hardware issue, because the whole supply chain risk management issue, it's interesting to me. The last count, there's 155 different supply chain risk management initiatives in the government today. We need to coordinate those issues, and quite frankly, organizations like ours, we invest heavily in what we call our brand integrity program, because our reputation is how we grow our business. So we invest from concept to delivery in our products, in our hardware and software products. To make this short, one of the things that I think that this body could help with, as we sit here today and we deal with this supply chain risk management problem, the federal government still continues to buy from untrusted sources. There's a culture across the government of cost and schedule, across the departments and agencies, where in order to save 5 cents on a widget, we're buying from low cost, low bid. As a result of that, we end up in the gray market, and then we wonder why we have counterfeit or malicious products in our government's supply chain. We should be buying from trusted sources. If there's some reason why we are not going to buy from trusted sources, there should be a justification. It should be public, and the liability from that should accrue to whoever the acquirer is.
Dr. Schneck, can you just comment on that as well?
I do agree with them. I'd also add that we look at supply chain, again, as an issue of your product integrity. We do rigorous testing, both in manufacturing and in acquisition of any product. And we would also believe in leveraging some of the existing standards to really focus on a product integrity issue, because what you want to know is, did that widget that you bought, is it exactly what you think you bought? That's the heart of the issue. So it's rigorous testing and then expanding some of the existing standards.
So I just want to make sure, clarify for the record, Mr. Chairman. So we are at risk if we integrate into the U.S. system non-trusted sources of product. Just I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
I certainly think it increases the risk.
Thank you.
I used to do this supply chain stuff when I was in the government, sort of on both sides of the table, and a couple points on that. First, right now, it's not that worth it. It's so easy to hack, that you have to assume that our Chinese and Russian friends are taking the low-cost approach to espionage. Why should they not do it? The second one is it's very hard to push this out to a global supply chain. We're not going to be able to get out of that. So this is an exceptionally difficult issue that will probably force us to think about how we're going to work with foreign suppliers.
Correct.
Right? And there's not really a choice here. So what I do think will happen, I'll just say this real quick.
Yeah.
Right now, hacking is so easy. Why bother? If we ever manage to improve our defenses, they'll switch to supply chain.
All right. I appreciate that. I'm going to, here's the problem. I'm like 5 minutes over on his time, and I think members are.
But this is a Clinton we can all agree with, right here.
The gentleman's time has long ago expired, and I appreciate the patience of the committee members who haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, so we'll try and get back on schedule. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for putting this hearing together, and to the panelists, your testimony and your answers to the questions have been very informative. I want to follow up on a line of questioning that Mr. Waxman had to Dr. Schneck. Dr. Schneck, I know in your testimony, McAfee Labs predicts an increase in attacks on smartphones and mobile devices in the future, and it's my understanding your company had partnered with a research facility at Carnegie Mellon University, Scilab, which is in Pittsburgh, the district I represent, about how businesses and employees handle mobile device security. And apparently this study showed that most of lost and stolen mobile devices create some of the biggest concern for businesses. About 40% of the organizations surveyed have had lost or stolen devices, and half of those devices contain business-critical data. Further, about 50% of mobile users that were studied, we found out they store their passwords and their PIN numbers or credit card information on their mobile devices, which I am completely guilty of. I'm going to erase as soon as this hearing's over. Seems to me that one way to tackle this, one way to tackle this is to make sure that the devices that employees are using are secure in the first place, so that if an employee loses them, that the data remains secure, or that you could remove that data from a remote source. And so to follow up with what Mr. Waxman asked you, to your knowledge, could you elaborate on what's being done by device manufacturers and app developers to secure their products for commercial use?
So we look at protecting them once they're received. So from what we've worked with, there are a couple of vectors on what they're doing before delivery. One is, I'll take the application side first. When people download an application, they rarely think about, is this application secure? One of the biggest dangers we see is not, did I catch a virus? It's, did I go and purposely download something with a big smiley face on it and a great app that did something neat for me? But when it actually is a pretty picture and a delivery of malcode, one of those instructions now will get that to be a platform to enter your corporate network or to start shipping back your personal information for sale on the Russian underground. So that's one risk. And the app developers, so some companies are very careful in their app markets and only approved, or back to the trusted source point, the only approved apps are there for sale. Other companies are more open about it, and it's up to the user to be very careful about what you download.
Mr. Connor, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it starts, we work with all of them. So from the Droid operating system to iOS to the Microsoft. The first thing we're working with each of them on is how do you identify the device itself securely and authenticate that back to your company. Because if you don't know it's connected to your company, you've got your first issue in kind of the consumerization in the enterprise. The second thing becomes how do you then work with the applications that go into that phone, and each one of those ecosystems do that differently. Some have sandboxing where they then can use our security or others to make sure they know who's coming in to put that there. They all three have very different testing mechanisms to test those apps in terms of that sandbox and how they communicate that back and forth. And then the third thing we're working with each of them on is how you secure email and content in communication, whether it's mobile, no different than we did with laptops and desktops before.
Mr. Dix?
Yes, and good old U.S.-based innovation has delivered today, available in the market today, a capability to lock, locate, and wipe those devices on demand.
We're getting close to maybe having a solution to authentication. It's been the holy grail for about 20 years. Just a quick story to help put this in perspective. There used to be just one government-approved private company in North Korea. Do you know what they made? They made mobile phone apps. I see a pattern.
And just another general question for the panel. Do you think the FCC has any role to increase mobile device security, and what should that be? Mr. Connor.
Absolutely. In fact, you look at the FCC, the critical infrastructure is there. I mean, I spent 10 years at AT&T and another 10 putting the electronics and systems into those type companies. It starts with that. I mean, I said you can look at the mobile networks as either good or bad. It can stop the crime I talked about today if used correctly with technology that cannot be broken today. So I think that if you think of one governing body trying to own each of these pieces, it's folly. I think DOE needs to work the public partnership and private partnership for its domain. I think Commerce and Treasury needs to work it. And I think FCC needs to own that infrastructure around that ecosystem, because to think that the attack vectors that the bad guys are taking against us are one size fits all is just ludicrous.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. We're now I think Mr. Gingrey is next in order.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And this question is for the entire panel. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Connor. Some have argued that before we enter the cybersecurity debate, we should heed the Hippocratic Oath and make sure that, in the first place, we do no harm. If there were one caution that you could offer us before legislating, what would that be? Mr. Connor, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the where I would start as a government is the bully pulpit, frankly. I spend a lot of my personal time, and with this team and others, spending a lot of time educating. And I think quality is a great example that this government got right. They didn't need equality. They just got on the bully pulpit that said quality is important. And when I think of security, the lexicon was not here. It still isn't here the way it was. If someone started quality saying, I'm going to get to Six Sigma, they wouldn't know what it meant when quality started before Deming's book. You heard cost of quality. I hear cost of security. We are focused on what cost. Are you focused on the total cost of security or just the cost to implement something? So I would start with education in your bully pulpit. The second thing I would start on is the inability of businesses to talk to governments or to themselves because of antitrust and the patchwork legislation in the states. I am tired of it being a one-way communication street to intelligence and nothing in return. And I understand they legally can't do it, but as the company that's tasked with protecting our government and governments and enterprises and citizens, it's pretty folly to me. I can only give you information. You cannot give me any.
Mr. Connor, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Dix and move rapidly.
Thank you very much. Two quick things. One is continue to inspire and drive an environment that supports innovation and investment. And secondly, be cognizant of the fact that the bad guys move fast. We need to have speed, nimbleness, and agility in our ability to respond. Attempting to comply with a compliance model that takes a long time to build and implement slows us down and imposes impediments to our ability to have speed, nimbleness, and agility.
2007, we had an intelligence disaster.
I don't believe your microphone's on, sir.
2007, we had an intelligence disaster in this country. The details are still largely classified. 2008, DoD's SIPRNet was hacked. We were unable to get the opponent off for about a week. 2010, you saw Google and about 80 other companies get whacked, lose intellectual property. Most of them have not reported it, but this will show up in Chinese products in about 5 years. Last year, we saw Stuxnet, which was the ability to destroy physical infrastructure using cyber attack. And we have a list at CSIS of major cyber events, mainly because I got tired of people asking me when we'd have a cyber Pearl Harbor. The list is up to 90. So I think what we need now is we need to stop saying do no harm. We need to move out. We need to do a coordinated defense.
So, Dr. Lewis, so do you think we definitely need legislation?
I do. And I think there are things, one thing that we can say now that we couldn't have said 5 years ago, we now have a pretty good idea of how to do this between the experts up here, some of the other places. There's agencies that have done a particularly good job. We now have a good idea of how to reduce risk, and we need to implement that.
Mr. Clinton.
I agree that we do need legislation. The question is, what is the legislation that we need? I do subscribe to the do no harm theory. I think the one thing that I would tell the committee is to understand that this is not a technology issue. It is an enterprise-wide risk management issue. The problem we have is that in the cybersecurity world, all the incentives favor the bad guys. Attacks are cheap. They're easy. They're really profitable. It's a terrific business model. Defense is hard. We're following the attackers around. It's really hard to show return on investment to what you prevent, and criminal prosecution is virtually non-existent. So I'd go back to the last thing I said before I finished my oral statement. Understand that you are dealing with the invention of gunpowder. This is an entirely different thing. You can't just take 20th century models and plug it in here, because you can pass legislation that will do harm, that will take away needed resources from where they need to be. We need a creative 21st century approach. And a lot of what we're seeing in the public policy world is not that.
Mr. Clinton, thank you. In the last 12 seconds, last but not least, Dr. Schneck.
Let's take this as an opportunity. Unleash the power of the private sector. We built this thing. We didn't build it with security. Now we understand this adversary. Let us take the information we have, the data we have, the ISPs see all the mobile phone activity. They can see that. They can protect that. Incentivize us so that we can still eat when we get done doing it. But let's make sure that we build business models around building security in from the hardware up, and I think you'll see this world change in a few years.
I thank the panel for the excellent responses, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Gingrey, and Ms. Eshu and I are talking about we're going to lock the doors and not let you out till you give us all the ideas that we need to do here. And we mean we'll let you out today, but seriously, in terms of helping us understand how to get this right, you've got a lot of them in your testimony. But if you could help us drill down very specifically, at least within the jurisdiction we had, we would really appreciate very specific suggestions back. We're going to go now to Ms. Matsui from California. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to say this is probably the most interesting and scary testimony I've ever heard. But I think that, quite frankly, our country doesn't realize what risk we have. And I think the things we hear about over the news are things, talk about hacking, but they're at a level where, personal level, that people understand. This is far beyond that. It really affects every sector of our economy, our country, the way we live. So I truly believe that this education process is going to be very, very important. And I also believe that people like you have to step up to talk about it in ways that the public could understand. The cybersecurity, everybody sort of understands it, but doesn't understand it. So I think with every advance in technology, we open ourselves up, and our daily lives can be impacted so much. I wanted to follow up a little bit more on the cloud-based services. Businesses and governments are now going into the cloud. And what are the unique challenges facing the cloud with respect to cybersecurity, and are we prepared, are we thinking ahead, knowing what we know now, about how we address these challenges? And why don't we just start over here with Mr. Connor?
It's something that's getting a lot of attention from everybody, and I think a lot of people are running before they've thought it through.
Okay.
I think it's very application and business sensitive, depending what you put in the cloud. Some stuff you put in the cloud that's username, password sensitive, that's fine. But if you're putting valuable financial information and intellectual property in the cloud, you've got two issues. The security within the cloud is not what the security was within a mainframe data center today.
Oh.
And how do you authenticate to the cloud is still a matter of how you choose to implement that, and I think that's very naive in its
So
evolution.
are we still at a place, though, where we could start looking at that and incorporate, how we integrate some of these things into the information sharing
Absolutely.
activities? We're still okay right now, but right now you talk about the cloud as a very sexy thing, so people are now jumping to it. I was curious, too, also about Dr. Lewis, that you mentioned that government should find ways to incentivize companies, and Dr. Schneck was talking about the same thing, to prevent cyber attacks. What types of incentives would be the most effective in your opinion? And I would also like to hear from Dr. Schneck, too.
There's basically I did it again. 4 kinds of incentives, right? There is regulation, and we're going to need some of that, not too much, and it varies from sector to sector. There are tax breaks. I mentioned this to some other, the Republican task force on cybersecurity. They thought this was not the best year to go after tax breaks. There are subsidies, right?
Yeah.
And we might need subsidies for research and development, perhaps some other things. And finally, there's a coordinating effect, right? Someone has to lead, and you can find, this is maybe a good story from the Australian example. If you pool industry together and point them in the right direction, they'll come up with some really good stuff, and we can find some examples in the Defense Department where that's worked pretty well. So regulation, tax breaks, subsidies, and that might include building something into the rate structure for some critical infrastructure, and then coordination.
Dr. Schneck, do you agree?
Not entirely. I think regulation drives a box around the technologies that you're forced to adapt. Puts all your money there. It takes it away from science innovation, and even worse, it shows the bad guy what we're not protecting. But I do favor the rest. I favor tax incentives. We believe in insurance reform, litigation reform, anything that allows a company to be creative, invest upfront in cybersecurity, because the upfront investment is a lot easier and a lot more fun than the cleanup, and it's a lot cheaper. I testified earlier a couple months ago about small businesses and incentives being needed when we don't realize, but the small to medium businesses make up 99% in some cases of our business fabric. And if you think about where some of the newest technologies come from, not just cyber, but maybe our next jet engine comes out of a startup of a couple of really bright guys out of college, they're not going to invest a whole lot in cybersecurity necessarily when they get that huge SBIR grant.
Sure.
But if built into that grant was some positive incentive or some extra money saying, you'll get this money from the government only if you promise to secure it. And we could be doing that for all levels of companies.
So government does have that type of role, though. And I think the part that I'm looking at is who convenes all this anyway? How do you do this so you all work together? Because I think you're absolutely right. The business sector can work together and they have the solutions, but how do we get to the next point?
Well, I think the first thing you got to do is relieve the legal obligation when we sit with CEOs. In my first public-private, all the CEOs agreed until they went and talked to their legal counsel.
Okay.
And guess what? Then it went completely dead. Because no one wants to public. One, you've got an antitrust issue of sharing. And second is the minute you go public, you create a standard to be sued against criminally as well as civilly. And that is the reality as a government person doesn't understand. But if you're a CEO, class actions mean something and suits mean something. And the minute I say something, I now put a different standard to me to be held to.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I see my time has run out. This is very fast.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Latta from Ohio. We look forward to your comments as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I thank the panel for being here. For someone who did serve on the Cybersecurity Task Force, it's almost like you go home, go to your office, and it's like, do I really want to turn that thing on now or not? And if I could go back first, Mr. Connor, talking about the yellow lock that you're engaged with Mr. Rogers in discussion about, a lot of times though they tell you if this comes up, the HTTPS comes up, you're safe. Are you going to tell me that's not true now?
The only thing I would tell you is unless that Chrome goes green, I wouldn't assume that you're safe.
Okay, because the reason I ask that, we got to get this message out to our constituents and the American people. And I know that a lot of folks, see that little yellow lock come up and say, "I'm fine."
That's right.
I hate to say that my daughters were on some social networking, and we had a problem for about 4 days before somebody could spend, it's how much money it took to get the thing fixed. We could get back on the computer. But, I'm really very cognizant of the fact now, watching for that HTTPS to come up, because, again, it also goes to the whole point of, again, if let's say you do online banking or you see people do certain things, but we need to be able to communicate that. So that's one thing. If I could ask Mr. Dix and Dr. Schneck this question. You both mentioned in your testimony the idea of creating trusted relationships online, either through authenticated emails or through whitelisting. Could you elaborate on these ideas and explain how they differ from the previous cybersecurity measures like spam filters and blacklisting?
Ladies first.
Boy, I tell you what, everybody wants to get off that one.
Go ahead.
So I would focus on trusted relationships and the macro and a little bigger. I would say that we all need to work together, and we do. Organizations such as Bob mentioned, organizations such as the NCFTA and the InfraGard show that government and private work together. I think we're dealing online today with a world much different than spam filter. I used to help build a spam appliance many companies ago. And what we looked at then was only the email vector. Now you have the web vector, the firewall vector, the mobile vector. Again, the enemy's faster. So when you start looking at trusted relationships online, we had at least 30 different parameters we looked at just at email. It wasn't just did I trust the sender. It was all kinds of things and indicators in that note. And now you multiply that. So you have, from our perspective in protecting against cybersecurity threats at all the different vectors, we have over 1,000 different parameters of trust that we look at. And it's not just an established relationship. It's what's your behavior been lately, as in the last 2 milliseconds and the last 15 years.
Continuing to advance the development and implementation of the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace is a step in the right direction. And that's an example where industry and government, working with NIST, have come together to deal with this issue of identity. Every one of my colleagues here has mentioned the issue of identity as being a root issue in this entire trust discussion that we're having here today. So there is an effort underway. It's collaborative, it's producing results, and moving to implementation for the INSTIC would be a step in the right direction.
Mr. Connor?
Just the last comment on that is the irony of this is if you think of who are the most trusted identities we use, they're usually government issued. And I think this is one area our government needs to get out of the U.S. think and into the rest of the world think.
Let me kind of go on with this because, again, when you're looking at, people trusting what they're doing on the Internet and banking, I don't care what it is. But, when we're talking about trust, this is another discussion was held a little bit earlier, we're talking about not buying from the low-cost, low-bid. and you need to buy from that trusted source. But how do you know? How do you know that even if you buy from somebody that's trusted, that that stuff is still good without going through? I mean, how do you go through unless you're testing? Is it you're testing constantly, or does it just throw that out to all of you?
So since I brought that up, I'll take that first with your permission, sir. So each of us that are manufacturers have a network of authorized resellers and distributors that we utilize in the distribution of our products into the marketplace. That's a place to start from, understanding who those authorized providers are. There's also a great deal of work that's going on right now through the Trusted Technology Forum and the Open Group to be able to create a certification and accreditation process for suppliers, working collaboratively with the government, again, in a standards-based approach to being able to address this issue. So there is some good work that's going on right now, but the fundamental piece of it, in my mind, is cultural. We're still evaluating people in departments and agencies on their ability to meet cost and schedule. That drives a certain behavior because it doesn't have security as a paramount foundation of that conduct.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Dr. Christensen, you're now recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the panelists. This is a general question. The FCC's Communication Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council has been formulating recommendations for best practices to ensure optimal security and reliability of communication systems. So how do you see this process contributing to improvements in cybersecurity? Or said another way, what is FCC's role in the coordinated defense that we heard about?
I'm really glad you said that because I've been sitting here trying to remember what CISRIC stood for. I had gotten all but two of the letters. We have all said, when you talk about cloud, when you talk about mobile, that we're moving to a world where the role of the service providers is going to be more important. And that's where FCC and NTIA are the lead agencies right now. There are others, of course, that are involved. But FCC originally looked at this issue, and they were afraid that if they took too active a role, as I understand it, they might be seen as trying to regulate the Internet, and they wanted to avoid that. So instead, they've taken on an approach that works more on coordination with private sector experts, with developing venues for these private sector experts to get together and encouraging them to come up with a voluntary approach. And one of the things I had said to FCC staff a while ago is try the voluntary approach, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then we have to think about more mandatory measures. So far, it looks like it's working, though. So I understand they have some measures they might roll out in the next few months. Commerce has some other things they're doing. This is where the service providers and their regulators will be one of the key elements of cybersecurity in the future.
Anyone else?
So they are in a position to serve in a key role in this education and awareness campaign that we talked about, in coordinating that at the national and in a sustained manner to help deliver messages to constituent stakeholders, whether they're home users all the way up to large enterprises, working with the carriers and the content providers to be able to help deliver that message. So I think there's a key role in that part of it, in showing leadership around how we advise people how to protect themselves.
Ms. Chang?
Just one point in addition, having worked with them a bit over the past few months, they're setting a great example. Their house is in order from a cybersecurity perspective. They have some new leadership, and they're really they're reaching out to private sector saying what are the best practices. They're reaching out from what they tell us to other CIOs in the government. So when you talk about the need to get the government's house in order, I think that's an exemplary piece. And in addition, they have a group of people really looking at these policies and really looking at these issues. And we've never seen that before. So I think this is a good time for them to not only build on the awareness they launched, I believe it was last spring, with the SBA to the hygiene program point, but then jump on that for the larger enterprises also as an example.
Well, Mr. Connor, and this is probably what you were referring to at the SBA, but your testimony notes that according to the FCC, 3 out of every 4 small and mid-sized businesses report having been affected by cyber attacks. So what is the role of the FCC in preventing the attacks or aiding the small business community? I'm not familiar with the coordinate.
Well, I think increasingly the networks underpin all those attacks. So you've got the ISPs, you've got the carriers themselves, and you got the devices attaching to it. I think one of the areas that we must remember is it's not always outside where those attack vectors come from. And just like organized crime found its way inside organizations, I think increasingly we're going to have to look at that as an attack vector. And that should be something that the FCC takes into consideration as they look at how to deal with it, in addition to the ISP filtering and list and the other pieces they use. But one thing I would caution, I hear a lot of rhetoric around building separate networks. And having lived in a world that I'm old enough that we had separate networks that only had cleared people dealing with it, I think the reliability when things like 9/11 and tsunamis happen, the benefit of having multiple networks in the internet outweigh the needs of a protected, isolated network, because I don't believe in today's world that's a real answer.
I don't have any other questions, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. I believe Ms. Blackburn is next for questions. Then I will go to Mr. Shimkus next.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. And thank you for the panel. Sorry, we do have two competing panels, and I apologize for not hearing all the testimony. Let me go with Mr. Lewis. You mentioned in your written testimony the importance of domain name system security, DNSSEC. Could you describe the problem with the current implementation of domain name systems and why DNSSEC is important?
Well, did it again. It's when I think what you've heard from us all is when the people who designed the internet designed it as a DoD network, and then they thought it would grow out a little bit. They didn't worry about trust. They didn't worry about authentication. Phyllis knew it was her sister at the other end, right? When we did it, we didn't have to worry about this, and so the domain name system, which is the addressing system, is vulnerable to spoofing. It can be manipulated, and you can, as I think you've heard, redirect traffic. So you think, as far as you can tell, on your machine, you're going to a legitimate site, and it could instead be the government of Iran or a Russian cyber criminal. You can spoof it, and DNSSEC uses authentication technologies largely so that we reduce that ability, really almost eliminate it, to impersonate another site.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the challenge with this committee is it's so high-tech, so, you know, we're lay people for the most part. It's just very tough for lay people to understand. That's why we have experts like you come. A lot of us do understand domain, just the basics, why you have a domain. Now ICANN's exploding domain names. And with that, should we, and this is one for the whole panel, should we be working with ICANN to roll out DNSSEC?
I think everybody is already working that. I would tell you, beware of newfangled toys. DNSSEC has a promise, but it also has liabilities today that are equal to the liabilities we have today. Will it be there in 5 to 10 years? We hope sooner, but it is not there, not even close. I think we've got to use the capabilities we have, like EVSSL, where the Chrome turns green, and you know you're safe. And when someone says your identity is who it is, it is. And I think that's where I put the focus instead of buying $19 authentication technology from where SEC sells to taking responsible liability for your identity and who that is. And if it costs you $500, I think that's where a bully pulpit starts to make a difference in the technology.
Mr. Dix, anyone else want to respond pretty much? Anyone else? That's fine, because I want to go to a couple others. I also do deal with democracy movements in the former captive nations, Eastern Europe, whatever you want to call them, and followed the cyber attacks on Estonia years ago, the meddling by China and Russia and their neighbors, and continue to be very concerned. Although the new technological age is allowing democracy movements to get their word out, to communicate, and that keeps evolving. But you also see governments like the governor of Belarus try to clamp down on that, and which I've also been very concerned about. So that's just a statement. I mean, it's just an evolving, it's like a competitive market. People want to get information, but the bad guys want to get around, and it moves too fast that we can really regulate. I've always said that about this subcommittee and the tech community. It's just there's got to be a lot of self-interest that gets people to move before they get caught. Let me just segue real quickly into, I serve on the Energy Committee and go to power plants all the time, big proponent of nuclear power. And Mr. Terry's opening statement talked about, well, you could be secure if you just had a desktop alone and were no longer connected. Now, with Wi-Fi and stuff, who knows what folks could end up doing. But the power utility system relies so much on data going to RTOs. Really what they're producing is excitable electrons to get on the grid, which if that's all we had to worry about and had a closed system, we'd be fairly safe. But it's all the monitoring and calculation of the load. What's the solution to the utility industry? Anyone have?
Two thoughts. One is I testified earlier. That's why I believe you have to start with DOE as a lead. Electrical is very different than nuclear at the source. We believe you've got to start within the power production plant itself. We're working with large manufacturers in terms of how do you authenticate everything in that power production plant, because you want to know what parts, whether the original ones or the alternate parts coming in, who they are and where they're from. And frankly, that doesn't matter whether they come from good or bad sources. Just know where they come from and that they are there. The second thing we then focus on is who are accessing those systems and sharing that information, so only the people with the right authorization or identity can see it. And then the third thing we're working with them is how that data is shared, because data in of its own at one location will not solve a grid by definition.
Two other quick points. The idea of a secure network, a standalone secure network, just doesn't make any sense. People bring their iPhone to work and they plug it into charge, and we have seen that happen twice with allegedly isolated air-gapped networks. So, forget it. We need to think about securing the industrial control systems, the SCADA networks. This is an avenue of attack. It's a different kind of network technology. Right now, it's not produced. It's the typical thing. When you buy it, the password is password and the username is admin. And it doesn't take a lot of activity for foreign opponents to figure that out. People also need to look at how their critical infrastructure connects to the internet. When you talk to nuclear companies, for example, they'll usually tell you we're not connected. When you do the actual survey, what you find is, sure. So we need to have some way to bring the industry. Some companies do great, others need some help, and we need to figure out how to do that.
And one point on that. The good news is a lot of these industrial control systems are the same across the sectors. So if you can get some best practices and some incentives in one sector, they will multiply across from the grid to even transportation and nuclear in some cases. Authentication is one vector. Another is what gets executed. It goes back to the instruction. Is a malicious instruction from someone you don't want going to execute on a system that talks to something that controls physical infrastructure? And that comes from working at the component level, making sure that you have technology in those components that looks at whatever operating system is on that and says, only execute these things. This is actually pretty simple on these because they only do one job in life. They're a component on the SCADA system. It's not like they're a big server. So you can lock down what they do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Blackburn for 5 minutes. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for your patience with us. I want to say just a couple of things. I think it is so important that the industry lead on this. Anything that we do, as different members have said today, is going to be passé before the ink is dry on whatever it is that we do. So as we look at the security issues, I think that your guidance is there. Another thing that we have spent some time in this committee and also in CMT, Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade, looking at the issue of privacy and the data security issue, the breach notification issue, which is a component of what we have here. And quite frankly, I think that most people do not realize the vulnerability that exist there in their home with a computer that is there. And believe you me, I hear about it a lot with my district in Tennessee, with all the songwriters and entertainers and the individuals that are in logistics informatics or financial service informatics or healthcare informatics and auto engineers. And so the problems are compounding for this every day. But as we look at the privacy issue, and in my conversations with them, let me ask you about federal preemption. And as we look at our standards on breach notification, data security, I wonder if you all have any thoughts on putting in federal preemption language and making certain that we're working from one standard and the importance of that.
Ms. Blackburn, if I could,
yes.
I would. We're supportive of federal preemptive notification requirement. I think we have 47 different ones now. If you're a multi-state company, it's very, very difficult to work in this. And one of the themes that I've been hammering on throughout today and generally is that we have to understand that this is not a technical problem. It involves cost. If we can find a way to reduce cost, we can have good standards, but we don't have to have multiple good standards. So we can lower compliance costs, increase simplification, we'll have better adherence, we'll have better security, better privacy, and at lower cost. And I think that that ability to cut through kind of the government falling all over itself at the various levels is critical to getting that going. So I'm very supportive of that.
Okay.
I would second that. I would tell you the single largest legislation issue that has brought security from being in the Stonehenge to today is probably California 1386. Why? Because it said if it happens, you have a carrot and a stick. If you've tried to protect yourself with encryption, you're safe, and if you haven't, you are liable for class action suit. That is singly the shot that was heard around the world, at least in the U.S. Problem being, as Larry said, we've got too many state legislations, it's patchwork. So that needs to get dealt with because it is inextricable linked to cybersecurity in terms of that. The second piece I'll tell you is the regulation that just was passed by the SEC about disclosure is going to have just as profound impact. The problem is it's only public companies. And that disclosure is pretty nebulous in terms of being meaningful for you as a small business person in Knoxville or Nashville or Memphis in terms of what that means to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. And now I think our final questioner is Mr. Bilbray from California. We welcome your comments. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Connor, do you believe that the law enforcement has the tools they need to go after cyber criminals as described in your testimony?
No, they do not. I got to tell you, if you look at the attempts that are being made with DHS and with Injustice to have the criminal network geared up, I think part of the problem is we look at it in their one-time uses for critical events. Well, unless you use it every day, that system's never going to be ready. We partnered with Interpol to do just that. They have 6,000 agents worldwide, and their issue was, because they certainly didn't have the money, Interpol is treated like a country now under passport control. We were able to put their passport information so it has biometrics. Unfortunately, this country doesn't deal with that in its passport today. It's first generation digital. The second thing it has is a digital, and this is all on commercial chips. It has software to do logical access, so those 6,000 agents, if they go after a tsunami, they can go on any network, including an internet cafe, and be secure in getting access to that information, whether it's mobile, etc. And last but not least, physical access to every Interpol office. All that technology resides on this little card, that this is a real one, that those 6,000 agents use around the world today as they follow crime, hopping jurisdictions that have 3 different standards, 3 different use cases that allows them to do their job. Why is it important? Because it's what he has to or she use every day. To the extent it's not something you use every day, It will not be useful at the time of need in some event.
So basically, you're saying we're at a place with cybercrime where we, mic's on. We're a place in cybercrime where we were in the 30s with the bad guys running around with Thompson submachine guns and the cops carrying 38 revolvers.
Well, and worse than that, we're isolated. We're isolated here in the U.S. with, as my colleague said, the most at risk, and no ability to interwork on a global capability with the good guys to defend that.
You know, it's kind of interesting you bring that up, because I think that most of us here will remember after 9/11 this issue of the technology, security, the biometrics, the high-tech stuff was one of the top priorities of the 9/11 Commission. We passed a thing called the Real ID Bill, and now everybody's found excuses to keep dragging it on. In fact, I think we're even giving grants to states for Homeland Security, and states are refusing to implement the 9/11, and we haven't. Correct. So we're giving them money, and they basically say that we want to spend it on other things rather than the first priorities. You think we may want to revisit that whole situation rather than just ignoring the fact that no?
Absolutely. I spoke the morning after Bush addressed both the House and Senate. That morning after, I was with Mr. Bennett and other legislators that were leading this effort, and spoke at NATO after 9/11 on we've learned how to defend air, land, and sea, the next frontier is cyber. Unfortunately, in those 10 years, we've made a lot of progress, but the bad guys have made more progress, and they can jump across jurisdiction with no legislative, legal barrier.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have to say that this is one thing that I think that our committee always referred over to Homeland Security. But here's a point where we may want to talk. This is a place that both sides of the aisle should be able to cooperate on. We've got a consensus there. And frankly, the bad guys in here, the obstructionists, are on both sides of the aisle too. So maybe this committee can take a look at how we can go back and revisit that and address that issue. And I appreciate the fact that you draw the line about, I'm concerned, and I'll ask the doctor to jump in here, because the two at the end brought up two interesting things, that when we develop strategies how to address this, we don't want to create a box that gives people to litigate the private sector, but we also don't want to create a box that allows the bad guys to know how far they have to move outside to avoid it. And I would solicit both comments. Let's start with the doctor, and then I'll go back of how, can you elaborate again how that us creating arbitrary boxes may be utilized by the bad guys?
I think it was said earlier, and even by the ranking member Estiu, this issue is so vast, this is science, that if you start saying you will implement these 5 things, the adversary is always looking at how to get around that. They know their target, they know what they want, and the advanced persistent threat, they spend money, months, and people on finding exactly the intellectual property they want. They find the person in the company, they know what the person will respond to, and they get it. It's quite clear that if we say we're going to seal up these gateways in these ways, these are the best practices that we must follow, when it's a regulation, that's where the money will go. And after that, the money won't go to anything new and different. And therefore, the adversary then always goes outside that and says, well, I can get in this way. It's just like the point to the industrial control system. They say they're disconnected, but true story after true story finds a little modem out the back so the person can watch the game while they do the monitoring. There's always a way out in science. And what we want to do is instead incentivize. You have a classic commons problem. We're not incentivized to do what's good for the greater good. We're incentivized toward our shareholders. So instead, if you put that money and that incentive toward innovation, we will end up building stronger and better technology. And just the point earlier, at many times the speed that the legislation could even get through to do the quote protection.
Congressman, I think it's a great question. I'm frankly less concerned about what we say we're doing. Say anything you want, by the time you say it, they've already figured that out. They're not waiting for us to legislate and regulate and figure out the next hole. I think the model is very clear. It's joint forces, and it's in DOD. We still have strong Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and they act on their own. They are highly integrated with their suppliers. There's what is publicly available. I served on the Joint Forces Advisory Board as a private sector person. There's what you do in that close that's public, and there's what you do that's not public. And I think that's how cybersecurity has to be treated. There was 10% of the money set aside to deal with cybersecurity. No Army, Air Force Department could deal. They had to get their best and brightest in on it, and they had to share what's public's public and what's not public is equally or maybe more important.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, they refer to Australia, being a son of Australian war bride. It reminds me of the story of a notorious Australian bushman robber named Ned Kelly. In fact, the head of the Rolling Stones played it. But Ned Kelly was notorious for putting so much armor on so that nobody could shoot him. And this armor slowed him down so much that they shot him in the back where he wasn't armored. And I think that may be very symbolic of the Ned Kelly syndrome, that we put on so much armor thinking we're defending, and what we do is create an opportunity for the bad guys to get around it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I thank all our committee members for letting us have a little more freewheeling hearing than sometimes we have. But the value of the content we got from you all was just unparalleled. And I think my colleague, Ms. Eshu, and I will be reaching out to each of you to say, come back to us with what really would work. We got a lot of that today, and our staff's got that. We're going to move forward on this. I think there's an opportunity to look at device manufacturers, perhaps the phone side, the router side. There's an issue on the education side. And so we really appreciate what you're doing out there in this fight and your input to us so we can try and get it right and solve this problem. With that,
I would say bravo and thank you very much. Every member really drew so much from your testimony and the answers to our questions. It's been most helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And with that, the committee will stand adjourned.